Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all, albeit virtually. I'm looking forward to spending time talking with you about the importance of data, particularly as we look at travel in the post COVID era. My name is Sarah Matthews. I'm based out in Hong Kong, and normally I would be traveling up a storm. But during the last nearly 2 years, I've been at home, but looking forward to the moment that I can start traveling again and going to all the amazing places across Asia Pacific. What I wanted to share with you today is how things have changed in the travel landscape, particularly when we look at data and how that's helping us and also our clients to understand the way they can approach talking to the consumers and what they're looking for. So it's really important to understand the landscape of travel. What we've seen and what we know is that data powers everything that we do. And data is really crisis proof. It's what we need to understand what's happening. And that's true of every vertical, but certainly in travel, it's something that we've been looking at since the start of the pandemic. And even pre-pandemic days, we looked at data to power everything that we do. Ooh. So what we look at, and I think this is really important, is we use our data and insights to ultimately build meaningful messaging and campaigns or content that will guide the traveler in all aspects of their journey, from the dreaming phase all the way through to transaction. And this is very much a case in point when we look at the travel industry, where it's really being redefined right now in this pandemic and what it will look like post-pandemic. So one of the things that's really important is when we look at pre-COVID, traditionally we would look at two areas of travel. That's the international and domestic. Well, what's happened during the pandemic is really a bigger focus on what we call local travel. So what does that mean? Well, I live in Hong Kong. And so for me, local and domestic probably means the same thing. But if you live in Sydney, you might be looking at locally what you can do, whereas your domestic might be state or it's national. And so that in itself has really changed. And so when we look at data, we look at what people are doing, whether it's hyperlocal or whether they're looking at domestic or in that international space. And what's important with data is what is the content that the consumer is looking to consume right now? And how do we take that content and share it with the right audience? And from that, we amplify that, and then it's critical to measure the impact. And so that power of connecting brands with consumer really relies on that data. And what I love about it is that you're taking, hard numbers and facts, taking that data to be in a way to connect emotionally with the consumer. When we look at this from a Tripadvisor point of view, we look at it at every stage of a consumer's travel journey. We look at it from the dreaming stage. What are people doing when they're consuming that content? We know that 70% of consumers are looking at reviews, reading reviews to define where they should be going with their family or with their friends. What are they doing in that planning phase? How are they booking and what are they doing? What's the time frame when they look at booking? What are they doing in the destination themselves when they reach that location? How are they engaging with more businesses? Are they booking more things? Are they doing more things? And when they post that trip, how are they sharing that experience with other travelers and other consumers? And so it's really important, even for ourselves, that we look at how our consumers are behaving on Tripadvisor. We know that 70% are seeking social recommendations before booking. So in that dreaming phase, they're really looking at that engagement. A lot of people we know won't book without reading a review first. 4 in 5 travelers will book with providers where they've had a prior positive experience. And so that we look at that, especially now when we hear about brand loyalty. And then what we know is that 57%, for example, are booking attractions and experiences whilst they're in the destination. So again, when we think about that, if you're a tour operator, we want to make sure that you're talking to that consumer whilst they're in that destination. What does that mean, especially now when we look at COVID? We know that people are going to be doing a lot more research. We know that in the past, people love to research for travel. It's part of that experience and journey, but they're doing even more research now because they're thinking about, where am I going to go? Who am I going to go with? When we think about travel, one of the areas that the world needs to look at is young children, for example, as their opportunities that may be for vaccination. Some countries will say, well, we're open for vaccination, open to travel for vaccinated travelers. Is that going to include young children? Because families will need to think about that. So they're researching a lot more. And what's interesting is that they're thinking about what they need to pack. And again, that's fascinating because people are thinking about where I'm going to go will also determine what I'm going to bring with me. And again, that's useful information when thinking about travel planning. So it's really important to look at, when we look at data, we're looking at where, what, and when. So one of the things that we've been looking at, particularly across Asia Pacific, is when are people traveling domestically and are they starting to look at international? For many of us in Asia Pacific, realistically right now, we're looking at domestic travel. We're starting to see more and more destinations open up. We know that the Maldives have opened up. We know that Thailand is looking to open up. We know that, Malaysia is soon going to be opening up. So all of these opportunities are there for international. But when is that coming back? And what we look at and what we can see right now in terms of the forecasting, based on the current trajectory, we're really seeing travelers across Asia Pacific looking towards the end of the year for international travel, but really, really growing that international travel as we come into Q1 of 2022, which is really exciting. So when we have this information, this data, we're able to share that with our industry so that they can get ready to open up their businesses for the Asia Pacific traveler who are looking to come to their hotel or their restaurant or their destination in early part of 2022. We also look at, from a global standpoint, well, where are people going? Where are they most interested in? What's being searched the most? And where have we seen the greatest growth? And interesting, we can see here from a global audience perspective that destinations like Turkey and Greece, lots of places in Europe are really opening up. And we can see that travelers globally are looking to go to those destinations. As we break that out further, we want to know what people are looking at and what is driving their destination. And what we see is that travelers are looking at, for example, infection rates. Now they're looking at vaccination rates. We also know that consumers are looking at, well, does this destination have clear guidance in terms of travel safety, travel planning, any kind of quarantine requirements? There is still, when we ask our consumers about their consumer sentiment about COVID, there is still concern about uncertainty, particularly when we look at certain regions. Asia Pacific, for example, with their government mandated travel restrictions. There is still fear of contracting, but we're also seeing this change. What we're seeing is travelers looking more and more towards, are other travelers going to be vaccinated? And we see a correlation between vaccinated travelers and that confidence in travel. Safety remains top of mind of travelers. And again, this data really helps us when we look at this. What are they asking for when they are asking for safety measures? We share that with businesses so that they can prepare themselves to understand what that consumer is looking for. An example of this is, are they looking for regular sanitation of public places? We see that what travelers want to know is what's happening right now in your destination related to local COVID conditions. What about the hospital and healthcare quality? What are the social distancing requirements? Do I have to wear a mask if I go into your restaurant? Do I need to provide a negative test result? Do you need a proof of vaccination? All of this is top of mind of the consumer. Now, this data is very, very powerful because what I can then do is share this with the businesses so that they can be very clear and use Tripadvisor's travel safety feature where they can update, well, this is what we require. And that's transparency is what consumers are looking for. And we know that vaccination is absolutely critical when people are looking to travel. And there's a real correlation. It's been fascinating when we look at this. We take UK and US, for example, where we see the more travelers, more consumers that are vaccinated, the more they're looking at booking their travel. We can see this correlation dramatically in the UK and the US. What's interesting here is in the brown bars on the left-hand side, we can see that 21% of vaccinated travelers have booked their travel as opposed to 5% of unvaccinated. So again, this gives us the right data to help businesses plan, help destinations plan as to what that recovery looks like when they're looking at vaccinated travelers and what they're planning to do. And that's fascinating when we look at it from an international standpoint. What I think is really important as well, that I mentioned this earlier, is data helps power tone. You know, for many of us in the travel sector, it's hard to gauge how you should be engaging with consumers. For a lot of small businesses, they worry about, do I do too much or do too little? And actually, even data here helps us understand that. We know that 95% of travelers say they want to hear positive communication from brands. 81% of travelers say how well a brand responds during a crisis will impact their likelihood to buy that brand in the future. Half of travelers want to learn about initiatives brands and destinations are taking, and 4 out of 5 travelers say they want to hear more heartfelt languages used by brands in communication. All of this is saying that the consumer is looking for positive messaging and engagement from businesses. For example, if you're a tour operator, what have you been doing during this pandemic? Have you shifted your business model? Are you supporting domestic travel opportunity? Hotels, if you're supporting frontline workers. Same with aviation. What are you doing in terms of travel safety? All of these stories really resonate with travelers. And we've seen this time and time again. There's so much negative news that consumers, when we hear about positivity, that's the first thing we jump on. And we hear this. What's interesting as well is when we look at positivity, what we want to hear is from other travelers. So it's really important when you're working and you've got these domestic travelers, is getting your domestic audience to share what they're experiencing. And sharing that is so critical. You know, telling people, what have you been doing? I've been doing staycations whilst I've been in Hong Kong. And what I've been doing is every time after I've done my staycation, I'm sharing that with other travelers, telling them what I enjoyed most about my staycation, particularly when I live in a city like Hong Kong, which isn't huge. What have I discovered? And it's been great. I've been able to discover things that I hadn't done before in Hong Kong. And as you see here, 69% want positivity because there is so much negative news. They're finding positive stories, which is really critical. So when we look at data and we look at how that delivers the emotional criteria of building up your messaging, we also know how it helps you plan for recovery, how data fuels that business, and how that data helps you plan effectively what you should be doing. If you're looking at destination, right, if you're a destination right now, you should be driving that awareness, getting travelers from around the world to start thinking about coming back to your destination, especially in Asia Pacific, where we've seen a very sort of more conservative lockdown across the region. Travelers want to come here, but they're concerned about the restrictions that may be happening in your country. So sharing what you're doing with your government is really, really critical. Similarly, if you're doing things if you're a hotel or an airline or a travel business, you should be sharing what you're doing. What we know is that travel is incredibly resilient and that it will always come back. My favorite phrase lately is hearing people talk about revenge travel, their demand to travel the moment borders open. And we've already seen in the US and in Europe, people are traveling and booking travel already. And so it's only a point in time for us in Asia to start looking at travel again. And with that in mind, I'd love to share this message from travelers from around the world about when they can travel again. And I look forward to when we can all be together having this experience, sharing and learning again when borders open up, especially in Asia Pacific. And with that, I hand you over to a message from our travelers.
When this is over, when this is all over, when all this is over, we're going to go and hold our goddaughter for the first time.
For most of us here, it's the perfect time of year to be outside.
Il y a tellement de choses à faire, tellement de choses à voir. Mon premier choix, la Tanzanie.
I want to be at the beach back home in Sydney, sipping on a really good coffee.
Когда это все закончится, я полечу в далекие страны.
Going to restaurants in the city was really the only way to get a taste of home, and I really miss it.
Yo creo que sería viajar donde vive mi familia y mis amigos más queridos y abrazarlos.
Well, I will say that sentiment, all of those sentiments are shared by myself. And so I will say this, and I'll leave you with this last thought. Embrace data. That, the key thing is to play around with it. Make sure that you're using it, asking the right questions, but don't be afraid to look at that data to help you understand what the future brings. But what I can say is that the future is when we can all travel again. And I know that we're all looking forward to that. With that, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your time. And I wish you all well. Thank you.